All right, well, it's 9 o'clock. My name's Mark Weicker, and if someone could give me the heads up on whether you could hear me, that would be great. John or Kristen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. And like I said, I'm Mark Weicker. I'm a volunteer attorney with the Special Education Legal Clinic. I also work for Albite Weicker LLP. And the Special Education Legal Clinic is a collaboration between Albite Weicker, Disability Rights Ohio, and the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities. And we do this every second Saturday of the month. Today we have a workshop from 9 to 10 that I'm going to be leading, which is titled Negotiation Tips and IEP Team Building. And then kind of a special thing we're doing this month, for the first time at least, is an open Q&A with a panel of professionals, including myself, two professionals from Disability Rights Ohio, and two others from the coalition. So that will follow right after the workshop, and you can stay on. For that reason, we'll probably hold most of the questions until the end, but you're welcome to drop them in the Q&A. And if I get a chance to take a break and answer those, I will, or otherwise I'll answer them at the end when we start the panel. Let me just check one thing here. And then if you, part of the legal clinic is individual guidance sessions that we have scheduled, for which are private sessions with an attorney. And some of you have signed up for those. This week will happen at 11 o'clock and 11:30, and you would have received a separate link for those since those are private. And for everyone else on the workshop, if you're interested in an individual guidance session, you can sign up for those the same way you signed up for the clinic, for the workshop today. And you can, for additional or for subsequent months, October, November, and December, we do have availability for those individual guidance sessions, which are 30-minute sessions with an attorney to talk about your issues specifically. And if you haven't signed up for the rest of the series of the workshops, you can do that at the same link, which is listed at the bottom of that slide, lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic. All right, let's see. So today's title, this is the fourth in a series of the Power to the Parents series that we're doing. And this one is Negotiation Tips and IEP Team Building. And like I mentioned, I'll lead this workshop, open for questions. And then really what we're going to do today is really talk about two types, really understand the two types of negotiations that happen, and then 9 strategies for special education negotiations. And the word negotiations might seem a little strange when we're talking about an IEP team, and I'll explain that a little bit. But I think it helps, and it's fundamental to the understanding of team building and collaboration if you understand the two types of negotiations that can happen. And even though it is a team building collaborative exercise with the IEP team, I think it's very helpful to understand how those interactions can be benefited through some negotiation techniques. So that's what this is about. And again, this is the fourth in the series. If you're interested in the others, you can sign up for those. So this is where we are today. By the way, the first 3, I take that back. The number 2 and 3 are posted. The videos of those, of the recordings, are posted online at the same link that I provided at the beginning. So you can watch those on demand. We still have to re-record the first one, which we're going to do soon. And then we're going to record this one, and it'll be up by Monday. So if you know someone who wants to watch, or if you want to rewatch it anytime, it'll be available anytime, where the same place you sign up for the workshop. All right, so let's get into it. Negotiation tips and IEP team building. Really, the resources that I've used in developing this go back to a couple different places. So the first and probably the foremost is Getting to Yes, which is a book written by Fisher and Uri, and this was written back in 1981 originally, and then the third edition was 2011. And really the book focuses on 4 principles, 2 of which we're going to look at today. And those 2, which are kind of the common theme that run through the strategies that we're going to talk about today, are separate the people from the problem, and then focus on interest rather than positions. And especially that second one is key in understanding negotiation, to focus on the interest rather than the positions. And then another resource I used, which is a great publication, which I would recommend, is a negotiation skills for parents, which was published by Disability Rights and available on their website. Some good, valuable tips in that publication. And then, of course, my professional experience as an education and special education attorney, and both on the school side and now on the student side, have led to my, informing this presentation that I'm going to give today. Let's see, go to the next slide. Some of the fundamentals that that go into success in IEP team building, I think it's important to start there. And I think probably most of you on this webinar would understand that these are really the basics for success in IEP team building and success in special education. And that applies both to parents and educators. So, number one, you have to understand that this is a long-term process. So you got to play the long game here. So when you're communicating, you need to be able to communicate and make sure that the team understands where you want your child to be in 1 year, and in 5 years, and in 10 years, and even post-education, in employment. And that doesn't mean you have to choose where they're going to go or have them choose where they want to go, but what skills do you want your child to have in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years? This, of course, would include transition planning when the time comes. And again, it's not necessarily a place that you want them to be, because that, can be, you don't want to determine that too early. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's employment or independent living or college, but what skills would you like them to have? And that's important as a parent to understand that it's a long goal and it's long-term planning. And the better you can communicate that to the IEP team, the better that the IEP can be implemented, and that you have a team approach to where the child's going. And I know that probably goes without saying to most of the parents and educators on the webinar, but it's very important to be able to communicate your long-term plan and vision to the team and make sure that's captured on the IEP. Number 2 is you got to learn a lot about your child's disability. So you have to communicate the ideas and the concepts to the school and to the IEP team. And you have to offer what tools can help, what things are a fad, what things are very effective. So you do have to learn and understand a lot about your child's disability, which of course is a process that just naturally happens over time. But the better informed you are about your child's disability, the better that the results will be through the IEP team building process. Number 3 is an important one. I think this is easier said than done a lot of times. You got to show that you're passionate about the services that you want on the IEP for your child, and you got to show that you're knowledgeable, and you got to try the best that you can to take the emotion out of it, because if you consider that emotion is the opposite of thinking, in a lot of ways that it is, thinking goes away, long-term planning and reason goes away when emotions take over. So again, that's easier said than done. I'm not saying that it's not a very personal thing to negotiate services, educational related services on the IEP, especially when you're a parent of a child with a disability. But it helps a lot if you are able to show your passion and your knowledge about the disability and the services available without the emotion. Again, easier said than done. One thing you can do is to step out of the meeting if if you feel like you're going to be emotional, or you feel like you're gonna zip back an emotional email. Just take the time to give yourself room to breathe, let your emotions play out, and then respond when it's appropriate. And again, that if you have to take a 10-minute or 15-minute break from the IEP meeting, you should do that and take the time. And I think you'll get some respect, gain some respect from the team members if you take some time and come back in a way that's composed. Not to say that emotion doesn't exist. Obviously it does, but you want to take it, separate it from your advocacy for your child. And then number 4 is you want to document everything. You just want to be better than the school in terms of documentation, and that schools do a really good job at documenting meetings, some better than others. And sometimes the documentation from the school isn't quite how you remember the meeting. So if there is disagreement, make sure you document that. You can use the PRO1 to your advantage. You can attach a statement of disagreement or clarification. You can always add a statement to the the PRO1 or the recording of a meeting, so that you can identify your concerns or identify what you thought was maybe left out or needed some clarification. The better you can document things, the better prepared you're going to be, to support your position in the next meeting. And by the way, this comes up occasionally. That doesn't mean that you have to record every meeting, because sometimes recording a meeting indicates that you don't trust the team. And there are legitimate reasons. This is well outlined in the DRO document, Negotiation Skills for Parents. But there are very good and legitimate reasons to record a meeting. If a parent can't make it, if you're worried that you're not going to remember everything that was said, but make sure you get consent from the team to do that before you do it. Don't do it, without somebody knowing. And then you don't always have to do it. Another way, which is outlined in the negotiation skills document, is to bring someone with you who can take some notes, so that you can focus on the meeting and you're not taking time up as a parent taking notes as you're trying to also pay attention. But I mean, it is good to document it, review the PRO1s following the meetings, and make sure that you clarify those. But that doesn't mean recording every meeting. And absolutely, if you plan to record a meeting, just make sure that you get consent from the team to do that. All right, this is really the crux of what we would consider negotiations in schools. And again, negotiations is a strange word for this, because it is an IEP team. But really, the truth is, almost every interaction we have with our spouses, with our kids, with individuals we work with, is really some type of negotiation. That doesn't mean you're trying to pull one over on somebody or trick somebody into, adopting your viewpoint. And that's really the point of this workshop, is to say that you have to look at negotiation a different way, or look at encouraging somebody to adopt your viewpoint in a different way. I'd say traditionally, and what most people who don't negotiate on a regular basis believe negotiation is you have an opinion and you want to win that viewpoint. You want to convince somebody to adopt that opinion. That's positional bargaining. And that means, I'm going to go into this meeting and I'm going to have, these are my 3 objectives, and I'm going to get as many as I can. And that really is the wrong approach to take, especially with an IEP team. These 2 types of negotiations play themselves out a lot in collective bargaining. And if any of the educators have ever been a part of the collective bargaining team, if you've done traditional bargaining, you sit at the table, the union wants this, management wants this, and they may or may not be related, and you might ultimately decide that, okay, we'll give you this one if you give us this one. And you're not really talking about the interest you actually separate and go talk about whether you're going to, accept the union's position or management's position, and you come back to the table and say, okay, or no, we can't do that. And you're not really, because you're leaving the table and caucusing, you're not really expressing why you don't want to do something, or why you can't do something, or why you really want something. So that traditional positional bargaining can really be detrimental, because even if you win the point, um, even if let's say the teachers get a raise, um, it may be seen as a bargaining chip then for the management side to get something. And this is just one example. I'm not to say that you know collective bargaining is toxic, because some school districts actually adopt interest-based bargaining, which is where everyone sits in the same room. Listening is the key, and you hear the reasons behind the positions, and there is consensus with every outcome. Not we won the point and you lost the point, and then you won the point and lost the point. It's okay, what are the reasons behind the position? We're all in this for the child here. So if you go into an IEP meeting, there's one unifying factor. Everyone's in it for the student that you're talking about. And if that's not, everyone has the same goal: provide the services for this student. How we get there will certainly be up for debate, but for the most part, there is one important unifying factor in an IEP team meeting, and that's that we're all here for the child. And that sometimes occasionally has to be reminded. But it's important to understand, and this especially for parents. I think IEP team members from the school may have a better idea because they do this more often. But this isn't a tit for tat. You can't go into a meeting saying, okay, well, we're not going to be able to cede this point. You have to go into the meeting listening. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is really the two types of negotiations. It's an important, it's a nuanced but very important perspective to have in negotiations. And that's not to say that you can't go in with goals. With positional bargaining, if you just say, I want to go in and I want to leave this meeting with a 1-to-1 aid, as a parent. And if you don't leave with a 1-to-1 aid, you first of all, you lost what your goal was. And you also, if you did get a 1-to-1 aid, the school employees on the team may be a little bit jaded, or they may have just been worn down enough to say, okay, well, we'll try this. That's really not a win, because it's not building consensus. That's not to say that you can't have that same goal. Let's say you wanted, an ABA trained therapist for behavior. And it's not to say that you can't have that goal as a parent going in, but you have to ask and listen to the team about, what they believe is appropriate and why they believe this is appropriate, and then build consensus to say, through questions and answers and listening, that this, okay, this is what the team has decided. You really have to make it a team decision. Easier said than done, but we are going to talk about 9 strategies that can help you out with that. One, idea I like to keep in mind when I'm negotiating, or at a meeting. Again, the negotiation is kind of a strange word for an IEP team meeting, but when you're working with someone, whether that's a parent, you're working, with the school or the special education director, you're working with your child or your spouse, really, what you need to do in any conversation is remind the person that they're a good person, they're a good educator, they're a good parent, and then just give them the chance to prove it. That really should be the goal in any collaborative team meeting where you're trying to add services, or you have a goal to add services, or increase the quality of education for your child. You got to remind the person that they're a good person, and then give them the chance to prove it. Okay, so let's talk about the strategy. Like I said, interest-based bargaining, the first and foremost strategy is that you have to listen. And a kind of hard and fast rule is that you should be listening 3 times to every one part that you're talking. So if you can get away in the meeting by, as a parent, by waiting through 75% of the meeting and just listening to what the rest of the team has to say before you speak, I would do that. And a lot of times you can do that because schools like to start the meeting and lead the meeting. So it's not difficult in a lot of occasions for you as a parent just to listen to what the team has to say first. The other thing about doing that is that you gain a lot of information from the beginning of the meeting until when the school team is done talking that you can use in your response or your request. So if you can get away again with waiting for three-quarters of the meeting before you speak, I would do it. And you may even say that, I'd like to hear what the team has to say first, and then respond. That way you can say, okay, I hear what you're saying. However, I believe this, or this. Or you might get through the meeting, and we've done this, I'd say 20% of the time, we'll get through a meeting and we'll say, well, that's really everything we wanted and more. So, we don't have to say anything. It doesn't happen that often, but a fifth of the time or so, we're like pleasantly surprised at, what the school is willing to do. And we don't have to say anything. The other thing that does is just make, at least it gives the appearance, and it should be the true appearance, that you're tuned into what the school is saying first. They're much more likely to listen to you and your interest if you listen to them first and intently listening to them. So look at the person talking, take notes if you have to, or have a person take notes for you, and really listen and mark down. And you want to look for the interest. So if they're not saying why, you have to ask why. Why would you want the small group instead of the aid? Why this reading intervention but not this one? We've tried this one. Why do you think it will? If it didn't work before, why it will work this time? Really, you've got to ask why, and because you have to get to the reasons why the school. And sometimes it'll get down to things that aren't necessarily appropriate. If it's, they don't have that personnel in the school, or they don't want to, spend that amount of money on that intervention, and then you can deal with that if it comes up, but you have to understand why. And just asking why will gain you points, because if you gave them the respect of listening, they should give you the respect of listening. And you're never going to convince somebody, just out of being loud and obnoxious to adopt your viewpoint. You're going to convince somebody to adopt your viewpoint when they believe they're a part of the decision. So, talking through, what the, limitations of their perspective are, and talking through what the benefits of your perspective are in a very calm and polite way will get you much farther than trying to convince somebody that they're wrong and you're right. So listening is so key to that. And if you had to do it in steps, it's like, the three phases are, you want to absorb information from the team. You want to ask questions to understand why, the team believes it, what it's saying, or the individual who's advancing a viewpoint believes what they're saying. And then, make your request. And then you have all that information that you've gathered from the first part of the meeting to say, okay, yeah, I recognize, the validity of what you're saying there. However, politics aside, I think one person who was a genius at doing that was Barack Obama. He would always, and first of all, he was a very good listener, but second of all, he would identify always with the first part of his sentence was, I understand that blah, blah, blah. However, but I recognize that blah, blah, blah. I understand your viewpoint. However, also consider this. Just saying it out loud, that you recognize and appreciate and understand the other person's viewpoint, is very important. Let them know that you care about their ideas. And again, occasionally you'll be pleasantly surprised that their ideas kind of align with yours. And guess what? Then it was their idea, and you didn't have to win it from them, and you didn't take a bargaining chip away from them, and you're building a team consensus because you're in agreement with what they're doing. So strategy 2, plant an autonomy seed. So this is, if you are familiar with a member of the team who is agreeable, or you think could be agreeable to your position or something that you want, somebody who listens well, then ask them if they would voice a request or voice a concern for you in the meeting. That way, again, it doesn't come from you as the parent, it comes from another member of the team. That can be helpful. Of course, you can get an expert to give you an objective opinion in the meeting and invite them to the meeting if that's helpful. But you can also ask that person questions in the meeting about why you think they think it's appropriate, or if other things have been tried. So really getting down to the heart, and this may take a little bit more time, and you may have to encourage the school members of the IEP team to give it the time that it needs, but you really have to get to those interests. And if you can get a third party to voice the concerns or make the request, somebody who's an ally on the team, that can be helpful. You have to do that. It's nuanced, but you certainly have to do that. You can do that, and it's helpful. And this helps too. I thought there was a good part of the negotiation skills booklet from DRO that I would include here. So I put this as strategy 2A, because to plant an autonomy seed, you have to have a good idea of the chain of command. And in that booklet, negotiation skills for parents, they have this little chain of command, and of course teacher, principal, special ed administrator or director, and then superintendent. Obviously the intervention specialist is in there with teacher. If you know who has the authority in any given spot, it would be helpful, if you're going to plant an autonomy seed. If it's the teacher, the principal may be a little more helpful than the teacher. In some cases, the teacher may be more helpful, or the intervention specialist may be more helpful, because they have kind of boots on the ground data and experience with the child. They may be more helpful than the principal or certainly the superintendent in a lot of cases. So, but it is important to know your chain of command, which I thought was a very useful part of the booklet that DRO publishes. And obviously, the teacher has information about the IEP and general curriculum and classroom schedule and environment, and the principal information about building schedules, transportation, availability of teachers, so on. Special education director, administrator, district resources, where the superintendent might land on a particular issue, and then the superintendent ultimate decision-making authority, which is typically not involved very often unless there's some type of administrative review or if it's a escalating situation. But that I thought was a helpful part of the booklet again. Strategy 3, this I would have to give a little bit of credit to one of our attorneys. I had never used this particular strategy, but Lauren Sabo from our office started very early on inviting the child to the IEP meeting. And that doesn't mean all the time for the entire meeting. It depends on the age of the child and the appropriateness of the meeting and so on and so forth. So you got to make a judgment call there. But I think it's very important for the whole team to hear from the child. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you put the child up there to make a request or even advocate for a particular position. It can be helpful, first of all, to remind the team who you're talking about, and remind the team that this isn't just Joe Smith, his name that we're going to substitute out on the IEP. It's a child with a voice, with certain talents and skills. And one thing that I've seen done very effective by Lauren in particular is invite the child to do a little slideshow about what they like, where they want to be in 1 to 5 years, and what they feel about school, their general impressions. And that may take 5, maybe 10 minutes. Some students really love it. And at the beginning of the IEP meeting, and then sometimes the student, then leaves and goes back to class. Sometimes they stay, but I think that it can be helpful. It's not, again, necessarily to negotiate a particular strategy, although there are times that I think it's appropriate to have the child, say, this is why I would want this, why I think this would work better than this. If they're a little bit older, they understand, the nuances. I think by all means, it's appropriate if your child is comfortable doing it. Can be very helpful. And then strategy 4, we talk a lot about positive behavior intervention, PBIS, for children in schools, and schools should be adopting these policies and implementing programs that use positive behavior support and intervention. So, but the same thing is true in IEP meetings, and I think adults forget that. The same thing is true, with your own children, with your marriage, and with your interactions with coworkers and management. Positive behavior intervention works everywhere. If you understand that what you're doing is reinforcing, it's a positive reinforcement of behaviors, then it's not, again, you're not hoodwinking anyone. You're not, convincing anyone to do something through some, strange means or by tricking them. But what you're doing is saying, hey, I appreciated, what you did for him last Tuesday, teacher. I appreciated that you pulled him aside and explained that to him so that the next time it happens, it'll be better. Or I appreciated that goal that you wrote, was effective, that we're actually making progress. I appreciate that the change you made, and a little thank you note, even a quick email, it just says, hey, thanks for that. And that may seem small and maybe even given for some of you, but if you get in the habit of thanking the team and team members for things that have gone right, then you don't seem as a parent as if all you're doing is identifying problems and trying to get additional services all the time. And again, that doesn't mean that you're not advocating or that your goal may be to leave the meeting with an additional service or increased minutes. But what it means is that that's not all you're saying. You're saying this worked, this didn't work, we need to work on that. Here are a couple solutions. This worked, thank you for that. And you're building a team. And that's why you got to play the long game again. Like I said before, this is a team that hopefully, notwithstanding turnover at the school, that you're going to be working with for 12 years. So it's important to recognize team members when they do something right. You'll get much more, honey. How's that phrase go? You'll get many more bees with honey than with vinegar or something like that. But anyway, the positive behavior intervention works with children and it works for adults. Just make it a point to say thank you when somebody does something right. I think that's important to the team anyway. It can be a grueling process sometimes with difficult, with lots of services, a lot of moving parts, lots of different parties with opinions in an IEP team meeting. So a little bit of a thank you for somebody who does something well, I think goes a long way. All right, well, the next one is a parent's choice. So we've all had the situation with our children where we say, okay, would you like broccoli, or would you like Brussels sprouts, or would you like carrots? And they said, like, okay, begrudgingly probably, choose carrots in that situation. But look, you just, they made the choice. And again, this isn't a trick necessarily. It actually relates to strategy number 7, which is hang the fruit low. You just want to make it easy or easier. So, if you offer 2 or 3 or more options, as you go into the team meeting, and then and if all those options are acceptable, and by the way, if there's a chance that they could be successful and the student could make progress, then don't eliminate things that would be acceptable. Don't always go in as a parent with what you think the best choice will be. Again, it's a free and appropriate public education. It's not the best education. So make sure that you include options that are reasonable and that are appropriate. So, is it handwriting with the occupational therapist, or could we do it with the intervention specialist, or maybe we have to go to a small group, or maybe instead we could change the writing goal. I mean, put some options on the table, any of which are appropriate. And again, it's the parent's choice. So you might not ultimately get to any of those options, but it does give the team something, an array of something to choose from. So, and then when the team chooses one, then they do take a little bit of ownership in that decision, because it's a decision. The same thing that goes with offering broccoli or Brussels sprouts or carrots. It's really important. It's basic. But again, if you remember that as a strategy going into the meeting, it can be very helpful. Start with the options. And this is another point about that. If you start with the options and then listen to the feedback from the team about why this would or would not be appropriate, or what the limitations are on using this particular option, and then get to consensus at the end. And it may not be your first choice, but if it's a list of acceptable choices, then you basically won through consensus, which is better than winning by bullying somebody over. Winning, I really think for the long term, it's better than winning your best choice by bullying something over. And that relates to the next one, which is baby steps. You may not get your best option, or the thing that you think is most appropriate. Maybe you have to try an option, and you have to try it for a period of time just to show and gather data, show that that is not the right choice. And that's hard to do, because you think in the meantime we're losing educational opportunity, advancement. But sometimes, if again you understand that you're playing the long game, you have to take what you may not think is the best option and see if it works. And then you might be pleasantly surprised, even though you have to give it some time. You might be pleasantly surprised to say, okay, either that worked, which is great, my child's finally making educational progress, or if it didn't work, now we have information to take back to the next IEP meeting and say, hey, look, we tried it, that didn't work, maybe we go to the next thing. So understand it's the long game. You got to take small bites to eat the entire pie. So that's basically how it works. Take a small bite, take what you can get at this point. The advantage that parents have is that you can call an IEP meeting anytime. Obviously, you have to be reasonable about that. You can't call one every month, or you're going to start to sound like a broken record. But you can call an IEP team meeting anytime and raise an issue if something's not working. So take baby steps now. Take what you can get, because if you constantly are asking for a lot, it's going to wear on the team, and it's not going to be in your long-term interest. And the other thing is you can request a reevaluation for lots of different areas once a year. So unless, and the team may agree otherwise, you can request more than once a year if a new for a new reason, like social emotional behavior, lack of progress or anxiety or something. So you have those options as a parent, and if you understand that it doesn't all have to happen at this meeting. If you're trying to win 7 things, it may be too much and overwhelming. You got to keep it simple for the team, and then take baby steps. Take what you can get now and slowly advance the cause over years. And again, that's difficult. But if you're patient, typically you can reap the benefit towards the end. Number 7 is hang the fruit low. So again, this relates to kind of offering choices, but more so hang the fruit low is just removing the barriers to getting to success. So, you got to make it easy for the team. Got to make it easy for the special ed director or the intervention specialist to say, oh, okay, I will do that. God love them. Those are difficult jobs, very difficult. And if any of you are on, there's a lot of work to do and never enough time to do it. So if as a parent, you can make it easy and remove the barriers. So maybe you go into the IEP team meeting and you have a goal written, like this is how, this is how I think it should look. Maybe you change it up a little bit, as the team words it a little bit differently. But if you write the goal, and even more than that, maybe you email the goal so it can be copy and pasted right into the IEP. I mean, do little things like that. Make an email introduction to a professional that you'd like to include at the IEP meeting, or a professional that you'd like to get their opinion, or a therapist that you'd like to use. Make the email introduction.
Hold on with a question, honey.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So if you make the, do those little things to just take away kind of the administrative task that the school members would have to take. So give examples of success. That's another one to hang the fruit low. So say, okay, well, over in this district, they did something like this and it worked. Or with this child, I know most parents won't be privy to what other children do, but maybe through an OSEP policy opinion, or through other research that you've done, you could say, well, this worked here, or again through data. Look, we tried this last year and that didn't work. Make sure you hang the fruit low. Make the job to adopt your position easy for the rest of the team members. We used to always use the example of Upper Arlington doing kindergarten screening for dyslexia. Thankfully, that's not an issue now statewide, but if you can show examples of success and make it easy for the school to say, okay, we can do that. Do the administrative stuff, make the email introduction. Those are all important things to hang the fruit low. Next one is get to the rule. So this is another part I thought was helpful in the Negotiation Skills for Parents book from DRO. They have a little chart about what the standards are for special ed and related services, and then medical and mental health services in the book. That's really the starting point. The very starting point is that it's a free and appropriate public education. But when you're advocating for either special ed related services or mental health services, you should know the standard. And then what I mean by get to the rule is a lot of what happens in the IEP team meeting and in the interactions and communications with parents and team members or teachers is that there's some gray area about what the school should provide and what they are required to provide. And there's so much wasted energy with parents and other team members, sometimes the superintendent or special ed director, giving their opinion about what they should or should not provide. And a lot of times it can be resolved by just getting to the rule. So look, there is a complex set of rules, both federal and state rules for special education, which I'm sure that everyone on this call knows in terms of, IDEA and operating standards in the state. And that's in both their statutes and regulations. So the regulations even clarify the statutes to some extent. But you need to get, as a parent, just get to the rules so you have a foundation for what you're even saying or advocating for. And that's difficult sometimes. You don't know where to go. Like, where do I find the regulations for the, an evaluation? Where do I find the regulations for a manifestation determination meeting? How do I know? And sometimes they won't be clear enough to tell you exactly what you know, but at least you have a foundation for what the school, what the minimum standards are in the school. And there's kind of an easy way to do this, easier way to do this. Well, it's one thing we contemplated when we started the clinic. And I'm going to stop the share here and then share something else. So this is the registration page for the clinic. And again, we contemplated helping parents research special education related issues when we started the clinic. And one of the things we did at the very bottom, so it goes through the discussion of the clinic. By the way, this is where the videos for each of the workshops will be. The next one will be right here. And at the bottom, we have this research page or research portal for parents and guardians. So all the things I just mentioned. Special education laws. So here are the statutes for IDEA, the federal statute. Here are the regulations. These are links right to them. So if I click on those, it takes me right to the regulations. Here are the procedural safeguards in the state. And here are the Ohio operating standards, John Peterson, autism scholarship. And then with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Special Education Program, or OSEP, they have opinion letters. This will take you right to those opinion letters, which are research you can find by topic or by date. And then there's a Education Resources Information Center, which is a little bit more research oriented and probably better for educators. But here's a link here, and then some additional resources: a guide to parent rights and special education from ODE, complaint findings and due process database. ODE, publishes all the decisions that come from complaints and due process, and those are very helpful. And you can look those up by date and by school district. And that may be helpful to help you identify what the standard is for any given issue. If you can't use this research portal for any reason, I've just, find these things and find where they're located online. And if you're a little bit lost about what the school's obligations are, then look it up and then take that rule with you, or at least have a baseline. And this, again, is good for both educators and for parents. Find the rule, get to the rule so that you have a baseline for what the procedures and operations and obligations of the school are. That's so much more helpful. You look like an informed parent when you do that, and we've tried to make it easy for you through this portal. You can go right to the portal through this, lawyersforstudents.com/parent research, or like I mentioned, you can get to it, at the bottom of the special education legal clinic page here where it says research. So that's one way to get to the rule, and very important to do over time. You don't have to know the rule, and trust me, you'll never know all the rules with special education, and I wouldn't pretend that you do. But when you have an issue that pops up that you need some help on, I would get to the rule and then have it available. Even take it with you to the meeting if you think it would be helpful. In the strategy number 9 is to use funded help. And what I mean by that is, like, parents and schools have access to resources at the Department of Education that you should absolutely use if you're at impasse or you can't get consensus, or there's just some disagreement about what the obligations are. And again, it happens. If you remove emotion from the conversation, if you, say, and getting to the rule, by the way, is a good way to do that, because you just say, look, here's what it says in black and white, here's what's going on here. You're not saying how you feel. You're not saying, what you think they should do. You're saying, hey, look, this is what the rule says. This is what's happening here. It should be a little bit less emotional when you're looking at authorities, at the statute, at the regulations, at ODE guidance. If you're looking at that and saying, look, first of all, it should be helpful in your discussions. And second of all, it should remove what I think is right, what I believe should be done, because that's where emotion comes into play and can derail, what you're asking for. But if you do get to a place where it's, the team is not building consensus, maybe somebody is being unreasonable, you believe, or, who knows? Maybe you just have a fundamental disagreement you haven't been able to find an answer to. That's okay. It happens all the time. It's a complex law. And there's a lot of moving parts, both on the school side and the parent side. So if there's disagreement, don't take it personal, but use your funded help. ODE has access to facilitators who can come to meetings and help you work through issues. And they have access to mediators. You can ask for a facilitator at a meeting or a mediator anytime, and that will be scheduled. And it is often helpful. It's helpful sometimes too, because with mediation, not always, but usually with mediation, the schools council will appear, and maybe you may either as a parent be by yourself or with an advocate or counsel, but it adds a couple people to the party who might have a little bit more of an objective view. I'm not saying all counsel, either on the parent side or the school side, always has an objective view, but it does add a person to the party. So it lets somebody look at it from 10,000 feet and say, okay, maybe this isn't such a difficult ask, or maybe the mediator can help identify an obligation of the school district that they weren't aware of. Same with council. So we're using that funded help through ODE, not always, and not overusing it, because I think you should build consensus with the team whenever you can, but using it when you need it is really, really important. You can also use the administrative review process, which is internal with the superintendent typically. But that's, it depends. It is another person looking at the issue and making a decision, but it is the superintendent typically, so that may or may not, lend itself to a different outcome. But you can use it. It is another exercise in due process that a parent has access to. So yeah, strategy 8 and 9, get to the rule, and then if that doesn't work, use funded help. And let me go back to my slideshow. That's just oops, share that. There we go. That slide is, oops, bear with me. Yeah, so strategy 8, get to the rule. That's just a slide of some of the things that we have on that page that's linked here at the bottom, like I mentioned. Always kind of a good checklist of resources to go through to make sure that you understand what the school's obligations are. And that is the end of my presentation. And our next Power to the Parents workshop is Progress Reports, Data-Driven Goals, and Recovery Services, which will be on Saturday, October 9th. You can sign up at the same link down here. Oops. Let me go, this link here. So lawyersforstudents.com/legal clinic. If you haven't signed up for the next months, make sure you do that because you do it one at a time. You can sign up for through December at one time, but that's for the next workshop. And then, yeah, that will end my presentation. You're welcome to drop any questions about my presentation into the Q&A box, and then we'll get started in a, I guess we can get started anytime if Kristen or John are available. Hi, Marbella. Hi, Tammy.
Hello. Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, this is Kristen. I'm here, but I can't get my video to start for some reason.
No problem. Thanks for joining. And just for everyone who's listening, we are we'll start the Q&A panel. So I'll introduce myself again, and then we'll just go around the room here. Mark Weicker from Albite Weicker, and I'm an education and special education attorney.
Hi, I'm Tammy Sebastian with Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities. I'm the statewide program coordinator.
Hi, I'm Kristen Hildebrandt with Disability Rights Ohio, and I am a team leader for our education practice.
Good morning. This is Marbella Cáceres. I'm the Assistant Director of the Ohio Coalition, and I'm also the statewide multicultural director serving families, Spanish-speaking families around the state.
My name is John Price. I'm an attorney on the education team at Disability Rights Ohio.
All right, we do have one question I'll read. Do you need parent consent to include a student in an IEP meeting? Well, I would say no. Well, let me take that back. I would say yes, if it's the parent that of the student, you probably want parent consent to include the student in the IEP team meeting.
And it goes with the age of the student also.
Yeah.
I've seen districts actually send out, and I'm thinking this is just a best practice they've adopted, but they've sent out parent invitations that are actually student invitations to the meeting once they hit transition age. So not needing that, but I just thought that was something positive that I've seen throughout districts.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions? Let's see, there's something in the chat here. I wanted to ask John and Kristen if they had any other insight on that. I appreciated the negotiation skills book that DRO drafted, and if they had any other insight they could share in regards to building consensus with the IEP team. Open to Tammy and Marbella too, for sure.
Well, this is Kristen. I would just reiterate what you said about trying to make it as easy as possible for the team to agree on something, particularly if you're asking the school district to do something they haven't done before, or to do something new for your child. It's very helpful to be able to come to the IEP team process with suggestions on what you think would work, or multiple options for what you think would work. Because I think sometimes teams struggle to figure out what to do for a child. And so if a parent can educate themselves and bring that information to the IEP meeting, or even bring somebody with them who can help the team, that's often very helpful, because I think school districts sometimes just need someone to suggest an option. And when that happens, then the team can often come to agreement.
Yes. Another thing that I will add is to identify the values, the underlying values for the professionals and also for the parents, because sometimes if the parent places a strong value on the safety of their son, obviously that is huge. But if the school doesn't see what the parent is seeing, is where I think those clashes start happening. So from the moment that you identify those underlying values, I think it's important to understand both views and try to work things out through very strong communication.
I think it's important for parents this goes along with what everyone has said. It's important for parents to realize that a lot of like schools are institutions, and institutions tend to get used to a rhythm of dealing with particular issues in a certain way. And when you do something as a parent that is not going along with what they feel like should happen, that can feel disruptive for them. And just recognizing that's putting them in a position of discomfort that you will then need to explain that's not a reason not to do it, but you just need to understand that that's kind of the mindset that they're in, and it's not necessarily like they're attacking you or attacking your child. It's just this is the way that this system has dealt with this problem up until now. And you can sometimes be the first, kind of cog in the machine to reveal to them a new way of thinking about a certain problem or dealing with the situation. But just kind of taking a minute to acknowledge that they're going through that can be helpful. At least it is for me.
I would just like to add one more thing too to that. Something that Mark had said earlier, especially about getting, having a goal of getting something in the IEP, and taking the time, sometimes the small steps, and trying something first and getting data. Because I have seen sometimes where, we really get laser focused on that. And Margaret, I don't want to misquote you, but I think you were saying like beating them down with that goal, if that's correct. And it's not good if we don't have the data, and we don't have strong data why that's in the IEP. I've seen negative things down the road happen by not having good data supporting why something's in an IEP. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. And we have another question. And a few more. It's hard to not take things personally or get emotional when it comes to our children. Do you have other tips for staying calm or not taking things personally aside from the strategies noted in the presentation?
See Marbella and I both smiling with that. Our role as the Parent Training Information Center for the state of Ohio, we are all, most of us are parents of children with disabilities ourselves. So we completely understand that statement. That's why we were both smiling. It is very hard to leave your emotions there. A lot of times what I've used as a strategy though, for myself and for parents, is for the teams to allow time to just have that, instead of getting right to everything right away, allow the time to have, to express feelings or concerns maybe that are outside of the agenda, like just getting right to the IEP. Because if you allow that to happen in the beginning, I've seen where that's been more successful to getting everything later on in the meeting. So I don't know if Marbella wants to add to that.
Well, one thing that I help my family is talking to me prior to the meeting. Hey, I'm here to take it. Go ahead, say it the way that it comes out. So, we need to release ourselves of that tension, that emotional piece, because it is hard to leave emotion at the door. We bring those emotions with us. So that's one of the tactics that I use with my families. Do you need a break? Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's step out. Talk to me. I am here to support you. So that has been very successful for my families to use.
Yeah, I mean, I think offering ourselves as like kind of someone to vent to from at some points is something that I have used. I try not to overuse that because I don't want to get used to just being the person taking that. But, it is important to give, to have parents, find an outlet that's not directing it at the school people, that when you feel those kinds of emotions, because anger is a completely normal human emotion that is always going to be part of this process, no matter what we try to do to, take it out of it. So just find a different outlet. And, I think, I know she said in her question, outside of what you suggested, and I know you suggested using breaks, taking time before you respond to an email. I know I even struggle with that sometimes. If I get an email that's really like something is weighing on me and I'm like, I just want to deal with this now while I'm feeling, some type of way, like you want to fire back immediately, but almost everything can wait at least, a few hours or a day. So I think doing things like that are really helpful. But there's no way to totally take the emotion out of this. I mean, and sometimes it's just taking a minute to acknowledge that. And, I'm going to have emotions about it, but how am I going to, channel it into being productive and, moving forward instead of getting hung up on past grievances.
Thank you. We have another good question. Does it matter what private therapies a student is receiving? And how does the IEP team know if progress made towards IEP goals has been influenced by private therapies? Good question.
I can start on that one. I think I would say that it matters in the sense that if your child is receiving private therapies and also the same therapy in the school, you want there to be collaboration between the private therapist and the school therapist so that there's consistency in what's happening with the child, if that makes sense, depending on what's going on in the private therapy. But if it's at all related to what the child is doing in school, it's important to have that kind of collaboration, right? So people are on the same page and they're not working against each other. So that's, I think, a place where it does matter. It does not. If the question is asking, does it matter if my child gets private therapy, then I'm not eligible for school therapy? That does not matter because they're separate and distinct things. And what the private therapist is working on is probably a different standard than what the school district is going to provide for your child. So there's no rule that says if you get private therapy, you can't get it. You can't also get it in school. The last part of the question, I can't really answer that question. It may be impossible to know if your child's progress is being influenced by private therapy. I would hope that it is, right? That it's helping your child. But if you're in a situation where a school district might be saying, your child doesn't need any more therapy in the school setting because of progress that's being made. If that's true, that's a good thing because your child is making a lot of progress. But the bottom line is you want to make sure that there's data that you can look at to know whether or not your child actually is at a point where they no longer need therapy in the school setting.
Thank you. Good question. Next is, who would you go to in a school district to find out things like placement options, service options when a child's current school is unable to meet the child's needs?
I mean, I would say you want to start with the IEP team, definitely. I mean, that's where you would start having those discussions because it sounds like, could you repeat it again? I just want to make sure I heard it right.
Sure. Who would you go to in a school district to find out things like placement options and service options when a child's current school is unable to meet the child's needs?
I mean, yeah, you would definitely start with the IEP team there and have those discussions, because if you're looking at placement options, that's going to be an IEP team decision anyways.
Yeah, and I would make sure, I mean, a special education administrator should be part of the IEP team. But if they have not been and they're using, some other person to serve as a district representative, you would want to make sure at that point there is someone in the special education department who knows what's available in the district as part of that process, because they are the ones who are going to have those answers. Principals and, people like that are usually not as plugged into all of the special education disability options in a district like a special education administrator would be.
And I would say once you have that conversation with the team and or the director, that, certainly if you've identified a couple possible locations that you go to, if you're talking about outside placement, that you go to those locations, meet with the director, stay for a while, see if it's the right place So yeah, you can obviously go outside and then bring that information back to the team. Next question, what are some strategies, required supports for parents on the team who may be disabled themselves?
Well,
Oh, oh,
I'll just start, then Tammy and I think Marbella can add to it. So the IDEA does require school districts to provide accommodations to parents who have disabilities if they're necessary for that that parent to meaningfully participate in the IEP meeting process, right? Or any special education process. So that can include things like accommodations regarding where the meeting is held. If you have a parent who has a physical disability and the school building is not accessible to them, so maybe changing the location of that meeting so that the parent can get there. If a parent has a disability that makes it difficult for them to, follow along and retain all of the information that's provided during the meeting, then an accommodation could be to allow that meeting to be recorded and have that parent give that recording to that parent. So what the accommodation is really just depends on what the parent's disability is and what would allow them to meaningfully participate in the process.
But I will add that obviously they have to disclose that.
Yes, right. The parent absolutely has to make that request.
I don't have anything to add to that, Kristen. That was perfect.
Next question is, you mentioned essentially extending the olive branch and proposing strategies to the school that may help with struggles in school. What are some reliable sources to reference to research services or interventions to propose to the school?
Well, I'll start because I'm the one who raised that issue. So I think it just depends on what it is that you are talking about. If let's say, for example, the issue is what reading methodology would work for a particular child, you would probably want to rely on some kind of expert who has recommended something to you, like a reading specialist, and then propose a methodology that's research-based and is proven to be effective for whatever it is you're trying to use with it. So you'll want to focus on recommendations from experts. And when I say experts, that can be a lot of different people. It can be a pediatrician, a reading specialist, a private therapist, a psychologist, all those different people who have expertise in their particular area. So that plus proposing something that has been proven by research and data to be effective in whatever it's being used for. Okay, so those are the best ways, I think, to go about it. The other thing I want to say is you want to make sure that this is something that has been individualized for your particular child. So it is often not helpful if you go into a meeting and say, well, children with autism need this, right? Or children with dyslexia need this. What you want to make sure you do is have a specific recommendation for your individual child, and then say to the school district, this person has said that this particular thing is going to be necessary for my child to have an appropriate education, and then go from there.
I would also add, I think part of it too is plugging yourself into people in your geographic community who know what is kind of there, because, the law doesn't necessarily care about where you are, but we know in reality that it is a limitation to know what things are like feasibly in your area for your child to access. So I think linking yourself with parent groups of other parents of children with disabilities is something that can be really useful in finding out things that other parents are using. I think I find that local children's hospitals tend to be really great sources of information about therapies, resources, if those are the kinds of things that you're asking about. But I think it's important to find someone who is kind of embedded where you are, and who knows the kinds of things that are out there. Because if you call someone like me, for instance, like we get calls from all over the state, and if you live in Worcester or Defiance or one of these towns where I don't know what's up there, I'm not going to be able to tell you that because I'm not in your community, and I'm not kind of embedded to know what's kind of available for your child. I can help you advocate for it once you've identified that, but I think just utilizing those local connections is really valuable when you're just trying to find services, or maybe a private outside the district placement or something like that.
Could just to go with what you're saying, John, with the Ohio Coalition, we actually have, we cover the entire state. So we do have people in those areas that could help. And then there is also some districts have parent mentors that are actually right within the district that actually know the resources that are inside the school district. So that might be helpful too. And we do have those on our website.
All right, thank you. Next question. Can a school reduce the amount of therapy they offer because the child is getting a private therapy elsewhere? I can start. The question is whether or not the child is meeting their goals. So, if the child is making progress and or has met their goals and objectives, then I suppose, yes, the therapy can be reduced. And that can be influenced by private, therapy or outside support. So now, not to say that you can't consider that the goal should change and or the child should continue making progress, but the therapy can be reduced. It's a matter of what the child needs to meet their goals.
One thing I always help parents with and support them in asking to whenever they're going to remove a service or take something down is there should always be data to support that, school district data to support that. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Well, and I agree with what Mark said, except I would just add on the flip side of that coin, if you're at the front end of this process and you're just now talking about like adding a service like speech, and the school does an evaluation and there are definite speech deficits, if they say something like, oh, well, if you're getting private speech, then we don't need to address this and we're not going to add the service, and you're being denied services on that account, if that's what's happening, I do think that's problematic. But like Mark said, like if the child has made progress and is no longer demonstrating the need, it kind of at that point is going to be difficult to entangle where the progress is coming from, and it would be appropriate if they're not meeting the need anymore to remove the service at that point. I don't know. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, good point, John.
Other thing that I want to throw in the mix is the fact that we have the academic aspect of getting a speech, but we also have the social aspect of that child interacting with friends. So maybe they have met the academic pieces, but you see other things happening, an interaction, the receptive, expressive, which can be, like Mark was mentioning, other goals to be set. So it's just discussions that need to happen around those areas, whatever it is.
And that's, I think, some of the discussions we also have with parents a lot. I was going to mention that with when Kristen was talking about the therapy before, we always have the discussion about educational model versus medical model, and what the school district has to provide in order for that child to receive, to get access to the general education curriculum versus what that medical model might prescribe. So that's a conversation that we have a lot.
There was one other question I missed in the box here, asking about dispute resolution procedures through the Department of Education. And I can start. And I think that was the catalyst to that question was what I talked about in the presentation. But yeah, first of all, they are kind of, it's a scale, so you can, it's great. I think it's for parents especially, you have access to resources like facilitation that I mentioned and mediation, and then graduating to a state complaint or a due process complaint. And with due process especially, they'll encourage the parties to start with mediation, and then appoint a hearing officer to hear that, which will ultimately issue a decision. So they are good resources. I would encourage anyone to use the link in the chat box that I put in there for dispute resolution, to just look that over or print that chart out, which is handy, to understand the options through dispute resolution.
Mark, we also, just because there's so many resources out there, I'm sure there's more than what we have, but I just wanted to mention too that we do have a training for professionals and parents on dispute resolution that goes through that process a little bit more in depth in the state of Ohio.